Max Payne is back, and he's world-weary, sarcastic and bitter as ever. Still mourning, or at least still pissed off about the death of his wife and child, Max is living a life of booze and pills, sustained in this entry to the series by work in private security. Posted in São Paulo, Brazil, in what seems like a fairly easy and laid-back job with the rich and famous, he finds himself thrust into a dark and intense plot, the likes of which aren't entirely unfamiliar to him, but which for me provided an engrossing and awesome 12 solid hours of entertainment. While there may be a few too many cutscenes for some, they do mean that stuff is constantly happening all the time, as the cutscenes are used to cover up loading screens, of which there are pretty much none, as well as tell the aforementioned plot. Most of the time too, the transition between cutscenes and gameplay is near undetectable. Many cutscenes transition straight from cinematic to gameplay, and while single player is very linear, this sense of interaction between player and cinematic meant that I was rarely concerned about the lack of control inherent in the game due to its heavily cutscene-based narrative. As a side, while they've done away with the static comic strip-like cutscenes of the previous games, comic book-style captions make plenty of appearances, and while they may seem a little distracting at first, I felt they fitted in well with the slightly over-the-top nature of the game.
I've had better ideas, but then I've also had worse ones, like accepting this job in the first place.
The dialogue is superb, as I've now come to expect from one of the writers, Dan Houser, who also wrote for most of the Grand Theft Auto games and Red Dead Redemption, which is pretty much my favourite game of all time. So sad it never got a PC port. Anyway, yes, Max Payne's dry philosophical quips are as sharp as ever, and make even something as mundane as picking up a bottle of painkillers an interesting experience.
Luckily, I wasn't the only cop with a pill problem.
I rarely found myself in a situation where Max didn't have something interesting or amusing to say about what was going on. Add to that James McCaffrey's excellent acting in the role of Max, as he was in the last two games, and you've got a rather memorable protagonist. So, the story, scriptwriting and acting are all pretty damn good, but what about the actual game? Well, this being a Max Payne game, there is of course going to be bullet time. And there is. Lots of it. Whether it's being used to emphasize a point in a cutscene or during a hectic firefight diving between pieces of cover, bullet time effects are Max Payne 3's staple feature. There are two sorts of bullet time in essence. One of these takes the form of the shoot dodge. Pressing the shoot dodge button while moving will make Max dive in the direction you're moving, and the game will enter slow motion, effectively allowing you to clear a whole room of enemies before you hit the floor, if you're good enough. The other form of bullet time can be used in any situation, without Max having to dive all over the place, but requires the player to have some accumulated adrenaline, which is collected by killing enemies outside of bullet time. This means that sometimes you'll find yourself in a situation where bullet time isn't available in this form. The shoot dodge will always be in slow motion, but when Max lands it takes him quite a while to get back on his feet, leaving him vulnerable to enemy fire. So while bullet time may seem like a very powerful and effective tool, it does have to be used wisely. You generally can't just go diving all over the place, although in some situations that does work. It looks damn cool too. Otherwise, the game makes use of fairly standard third-person shooting mechanics. Max Payne 3 makes use of a cover system, which wasn't present in the previous games. Some people have taken offense to this, but I personally thought it was okay. It functions fairly well and is certainly better than the cover system in Rockstar's Grand Theft Auto 4. The enemies are pretty smart though, and will try to flank you given the opportunity. As well as that, lots of the cover is destructible, so I don't think the idea is to have a reliance on taking cover all the time. I felt that more than many other third-person shooters, Max Payne 3 wants you to be rather more mobile. Indeed, I often found that cowering behind cover resulted in me dying more than just diving headfirst in bullet time into a whole group of enemies and taking them all out before hitting the floor. I'm not sure if it's actually a feature or just my imagination, but it seems that taking out a large number of enemies in one burst of bullet time would result in some kind of badass quip, suggesting that that's the way it's meant to be played. In any case, the shooting was really damn fun. Emptying a whole room in slow motion felt awesome, and there are a ton of really cool scripted set pieces which, similarly to the cutscenes, may not appeal to some, and bear in mind this is my opinion, but I found added to the epic action movie-like qualities the game had. While Max Payne 3's main selling point of course is the single player and its story, it also features a fairly expansive multiplayer component. I must say I didn't expect very much from it, but it's actually pretty good. Most of the time it's pretty chaotic, although there are some modes such as Gang Wars which add more direction to the gameplay, but it's almost always really fun. As well as that, the developers have done a pretty good job of implementing bullet time into multiplayer. Instead of slowing down the whole world, only people in your line of sight are affected. Sounds like it just isn't going to work, but it did, and surprisingly well. They've also added a number of other uses for built-up adrenaline, such as giving your team extra firepower or confusing the enemy team and making them unable to tell the difference between an ally and a foe. While I don't think I'd personally spend that much time in multiplayer, it adds far more to the game than I expected it to. It doesn't feel at all tacked on like so many other multiplayer components do in other games, and that was a nice surprise. The game also featured a few single-player arcade modes, time and score attacks, things like that. I must admit, I barely touched them, but they seemed solid enough, so for those of you who want to work out the perfect way of completing a level, there's provision for you too. On the technical side of things, Rockstar have done a really awesome job with the PC port of the game. I'd even go so far as to say that it looks like PC was the lead platform. The texture work especially is absolutely fantastic, the lighting's very nice indeed, and they've even included a load of DirectX 11 features in the well customizable graphics options such as tessellation for increasing the number of polygons in surfaces and making them appear smoother. It's a shame this tessellation wasn't used to make some surfaces bumpier where they should be, for example on the cobbled roads of the Brazilian shanty towns, but I can live with that. What's most exciting though is how far the Rage game engine has come since it powered the PC ports of Grand Theft Auto 4. Performance and appearance have both improved enormously, and I can't wait to see this engine used in future Rockstar PC ports. Overall, while the multiplayer component and arcade modes are dwarfed by the game's more narrative elements, they add enough to possibly keep you playing this game long after the 12-hour story's over, and combined with a strong storytelling, make Max Payne 3 a very well-rounded title.